Hello, US 102 CCAP class. Um, I just want to say a few things. So, um, first of all, uh, most of you, I mean, I'd say everyone, hey, you're doing great. And there's just been a few things to try to fix here and there, and everyone is working hard. Um, And so I'm just going to do a quick summary of kind of what have covered and just talk about where we're going. Now, look, I want to also mention I'm a little behind on some of the grading. I will get to your essays as soon as possible. And my Zoom office hours are going to have to be moved to Thursday evening. Okay. And I'll post a link on Thursday morning for that, just as a reminder. Okay, so having said that, we look back, we went over Mother Jones, and I enjoyed reading all the essays so far that I've just looked at. I haven't been able to grade everything, but this idea of what the United States has gone through in terms of class struggle and the fight to have workers' rights, and um, something that's kind of interesting as well is in the United States, the way that labor militancy has led to so many of the freedoms that we enjoy that make America a great place to live, or has, in terms of like, well, if you're allowed to take a potty break, if the company's not allowed to lock you up like those women in a building so that you can't get out if you need to leave the building, you're not working 14-hour days like as a general rule. I mean, I have two jobs. A lot of us are working harder. We're losing a lot of our workers' rights, by the way, but that's a whole nother topic. But we've generally speaking, a lot of the things that we consider to be what workers have a right to were fought for us by the labor movement that was generally dominated by anarchist ideologues. It's true, communists and socialists. Um, those were the political ideologies that were mainly backed behind them. But in the middle of that, something that I might be able to talk about more later on, the United States government was aware, and many elites, that these movements were popular and they were fighting for popular causes. And some of the big labor movements and unions actually weeded out a lot of communists, and they tried to distance themselves, or basically keep, sometimes even like snitch, for lack of a better word. They basically were working against those interests, and so that's an interesting history in of itself. I just want to throw out there. Now we're moving on into um, uh, the U.S. role in foreign policy and its legacy of an imperialism. Now, I want you to really pause and think about the implications of this week, because for many people, and this is the mixed reputation that the United States has. So, on one hand, many people come here wanting upward mobility capitalism, freedom of religion, and these are some of those things. Those are some of the things right there that has made America very popular with people wanting to immigrate into this country. But on the other hand, what a lot of Americans don't understand, because our government has had it in their interest to not really articulate it this way, and it seems that mainstream media, even the liberal media, doesn't want to highlight our role as an imperial power that is not always appreciated by many people in the world. And there's obvious reasons with that. And actually, I would say that factually, historically, the United States, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have usually been pretty much on the same page in regards to using US muscle to get what we want, and for smaller nations to feel disadvantaged. Okay. Um, so, having said that, um, I cover, how do we get Hawaii? And and you're going to see the Philippines, how we treated the Philippines. And then I end the last video on the Marshall Islands, which is actually historically at a much later time than the original time periods we're talking about. I wanted to kind of just show you, though, how this has been a long-standing, continuing policy by the U.S. government. And by further extent, you're not required to watch, but I'm just going to post 2 videos underneath this announcement of what's going on with the United States in Greenland and Denmark and with Canada. And at this point right now, the U.S. involvement in supporting the Alberta separatist movement. Now, I'm not giving you long, elaborate explanation videos on it. I'm just showing you that what's interesting that I want to say is that some of the Democrats and some of the Republicans are trying to push back against our current president by saying, appalled that he's basically threatening to take Greenland no matter what away from Denmark's rule. I mean, it's also complicated because Greenland is also basically kind of like the Puerto Rico of Denmark. It's like they want to be separate as well, but they're also they're linked in an imperial relationship somewhat with the Danish. Okay, so there's that also. But that's a whole nother topic. But the Danish military has been one of the top supporters of the U.S. and U.S. roles in the world militarily. And Trump has kind of made it sound like that there was no real contribution from NATO members, and that he's saying, the United States has a right and absolutely must get Greenland. And this is considered insulting to the Danish, and especially the veterans. And you're seeing they had a protest. And right now, the United States is actively now sort of colluding with Alberta separatists that want to break away from Canada. And again, the president has said, and this is the only president that's ever announced, and this is not what he announced in his campaign, that he was going to try to make Canada the 51st state of the United States. But here's my whole point. My whole point is that the president isn't really acting outside of U.S. history, right? If we're looking, what's different is he's doing it to people who are perceived to be allies that at least are conceptually supposed to be more on our same level. And they're being treated the same way that we've treated the Philippines or other smaller nations, island nations that we're learning about, Marshall Islands and so forth. So this is what's really kind of throwing things off. Like, okay, so allies are now getting the treatment. And it's interesting that Carney, who's the Prime Minister of Canada, who's had a lot of pushback from the United States, but celebrated by a lot of the international community, where he quoted in Davos the famous line from Thucydides that everybody who studies political science knows this line. He says, the strong do what they want and the weak suffer what they must. And that even middle powers, as Canada is saying, are finding themselves kind of put under this heel of U.S. power. In other words, supposedly they were an ally and a number one trading partner, and now Canada feels somewhat like that they're under the heel of the United States. And their question is, well, what leverage do they really have, right? And so they're, in a sense, kind of feeling like what it feels like for other nations. They're not necessarily arguing it in that way either, but that's something that I'm just observing and kind of showing you in this history. So think about all of that. Think, of what's happening there. And anyhow, hopefully you'll find this part interesting and informative, because it's definitely not a conversation that many in the United States have. Really, only the far left ever makes criticism of this. And sometimes the more hard right, that's isolationist, also does criticize this aspect of U.S. foreign policy too. Like, why do we need to be having bases everywhere? Why do we need to keep taking from all these other nations? There's a little different set of concerns that a leftist has as opposed to a far right person. But outside of that, again, Democrats and Republicans generally in the United States have always kind of been, generally speaking, on the same page. Um, but and you'll see more of that history as we go further in the upcoming weeks. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask, and we'll be in touch.